Hello. We're reading a chapter a day from this book, Here If You Need Me by Kate Braestrup. It's her essays and remembrances from the time when she was a chaplain to the Maine game wardens. This is chapter 7. Drew was considered an unusual specimen of state trooper because he had an earring, wrote poetry, and ate whole grains. Cops in general are not known for eccentricity. The standard law enforcement process of selection, hiring, and training tends to both find and produce a middle-class, middle-brow leaning toward conservative normality. By cop standards, therefore, game wardens are a little unusual too. Native Americans in a Canadian reservation nicknamed their local police force the Men with No Legs, because officers were so seldom seen outside their vehicles. American police work is clearly a combustion engine-driven occupation, but unlike other law enforcement officers, game wardens have legs and know how to use them. They also have, as envious deputies and troopers point out, lots of toys: canoes, motorboats, airboats, ATVs, airplanes, snowmobiles, crampons, waders, and snowshoes. A truck gets wardens and their equipment from one point of access to another, but the truck is not the primary tool for their enforcement activity, the way the cruiser is for most police officers. Game wardens enforce fish and wildlife laws that govern where, when, and how hunters, trappers, and fishermen can pursue what are fast becoming rare hobbies, rather than ordinary parts of rural life. The Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife employs biologists who monitor population levels for various species and attempt to determine sustainable levels of harvest. Poachers can wreak havoc on deer populations. Some years, Washington County's deer have been nearly wiped out, for example, and deer can wreak havoc on the ecosystem in areas where hunting is unpopular. Unchecked, deer transform exurban vegetable gardens and zinnia beds, as well as the vegetation other mammals and birds depend on, into abundant fat stores, and then rapidly into overabundant deer. Sentimental supplemental feedings of hay and corn by well-meaning nature lovers doesn't help. A percentage of Mainers, most, though not all, transplants from away, think hunting deer and other animals is dangerous, cruel, and disrespectful. Hunting certainly poses hazards, and the Warden Service does have to search for hunters who get themselves lost in the woods. But people who hunt are generally capable of looking after themselves until help arrives, unlike those who pursue what Lieutenant Trisdale once referred to as non-consumptive outdoor recreation. I picture pink-cheeked bird watchers and pale hunters coughing blood into their blaze orange mittens. Of course, wardens regularly respond to and investigate hunting accidents. A number of these turn out to be not particularly well-disguised suicides, but others sometimes involve the careless use of firearms by inexperienced, irresponsible, or drunken hunters. There is no way to excuse the inexcusable. Statistically speaking, deer hunting is not nearly as dangerous to human life and limb as is processing cows into hamburger. And deer represent a relatively cruelty-free source of organic meat. Totally free range right up until the moment of death, deer can be deer. Wild, free, browsing spring grass, tree buds and lettuce shoots, fighting other deer for mates, enjoying the all-natural thrill of being chased by coyotes and stray dogs. Then one day, when a deer is wandering along thinking deer thoughts, bang! Not such a bad way to go, a warden ruminated once, but then he was a hunter. And besides, at the time he was comparing the death of a deer to his brother's prolonged, excruciating struggle with terminal cancer, perhaps that was unfair. Still, even if a hunter botches the job and a deer suffers before it dies, that suffering does not begin to compare with the hideous misery of the average heifer born for the stockyard, the slaughterhouse, and the sesame seed bun. This can be difficult to convey to people whose meat comes packaged in styrofoam and saran wrap, but to kill and butcher what you eat can encourage a true understanding of and respect for animals. After all, Native Americans managed to be both respectful and enthusiastic carnivores, and how many small-scale farmers tenderly scratched the backs of the hogs they will one day consume as bacon. Throw your nets on the right side, Jesus advised his fishermen friends. How many fish flopped and gasped their last in their Christ-blessed nets that day? So many, if you're interested, that they were not able to haul the nets in. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, died after eating a bad bit of pork. I wonder, had he been introduced to the pig? Some hunters I have encountered do fit the stereotype of the tobacco-chewing, beer-swilling, wife-beating redneck who will shoot carelessly at anything that moves. The wardens themselves tell stories of fishermen who cast their nets on the right side, hauling in more than they can use or the waterway can spare, and think nothing of the damage they're causing when they don't throw most of the catch back. But the hunters and fishermen I know best, the game wardens who hunt and fish, are intimately and affectionately involved with the natural world. It should be mentioned here that a Maine game warden's idea of homey decor involves plenty of taxidermy, which I suppose might indicate either disrespect or aesthetic appreciation. Still, the warden works in the Maine woods, protects the denizens of the Maine woods, eats from the Maine woods, and would just as soon die in the Maine woods, given the usual alternatives, the highway, the hospital, the nursing home. Not surprisingly, game wardens tend to be well informed when it comes to Maine's natural history. Ian Cook took me out for a ride around his district on a perfect Maine autumn day. The sky was a rich cerulean. Big blueberry burners, squirting flame, crawled back and forth along the contours of the barrens, slowly painting long, ashy black stripes across the crimson hills. The maples, crowding the edges of old logging trails, formed archways of saffron and gold. It was, Ian agreed, a fine day to be a game warden. Ian lives and patrols in Washington County, which Mainers know to be the true down east. As we drove along, he took detours to show me vistas that, however familiar, still struck him as particularly gorgeous. And with unnerving suddenness, he kept pulling the truck onto the verge to point out creatures I would never have spotted on my own. A long-beaked woodcock that glared at us with high-set, disapproving eyes from under a bayberry bush, and a lithe black mink hunting grasshoppers in a roadside patch of high gold grass. At each revelation, Ian's delighted blue eyes found mine to see whether I shared his wonder at these creatures. Ian is a game warden and a hunter. He also moonlights as a shepherd. Before we concluded our tour of his district, he took me to see his sheep grazing in meadows overlooking the sea. In summer, he transports them out to the islands to fatten languorously far from the mainland's coyotes and dogs. This group I just brought in from Matinick, he said. See that one there? He was pointing to a fat young lamb. That's Walter. His mother rejected him at birth, so my daughters bottle-fed him all summer. He slept in a cardboard box by the wood stove until just a few weeks ago. He looks fine, doesn't he? Walter? Hey, Walt, come here. Walter looked up and trotted briskly over to us, baaing hopefully for a treat. Ian reached through the wire fence, to rub the lamb's snoot. "Nice fat fella you are, Walter, hey? Good boy. What a beauty you are." Ian's strong fingers wiggled down through Walter's thick wool and scratched the happy lamb around his neck and jaw. Walter's eyelids drooped. He was overcome with bliss. Before Christmas, the family would eat Walter, and Walter would taste just fine. Back at his house, Ian told me, "I pinched 2 clergymen night hunting right there in that back field last summer." He'd already played the English fiddle and served me a cup of Earl Grey tea out of a delicate china cup. They'd just finished up one of those pew jumping prayer services they hold, one of their revivals, and I guess they figured they'd caught their share of souls they could afford to sin a little. 2 deer, bang, bang, one for each of them. I saw them do it, but when I confronted them, they lied. Lied to me and cussed too. Can you believe it? He poured me some more tea. His wife, a strikingly beautiful redhead, shook her head. She was spinning fine wool on a lovely hand-built wheel. "You want a scone?" Ian inquired while his youngest daughter showed me the socks she had knitted. Ian would probably be offended if I told him that he and his brother and sister Warden strike me as old-fashioned, though I mean it in the nicest possible sense. Old-fashioned may not be the right description anyway. Maybe there have been at all times and in all places women and men who stand firmly rooted in a love of engagement with the natural world on the one hand, and a commitment to human service on the other. Leaving aside the question of whether such a life is virtuous, it appears to be both satisfying and enviably entertaining. In his book, The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, cosmologist Brian Sweden offers the following exercise. Invite someone to visit you who lives at least 20 miles away and who has never visited you before. You can give verbal instructions on how to get to your abode, but the one rule is this. In your directions, you may refer to anything but human artifice. You may refer to hills, oak trees, the constellations of the night sky, the lakes or ocean shores or caves, ponds, trails, prairies, estuaries, bluffs, woodlands, creeks, swamps, and so on. No houses, no traffic lights, no streets or streetlights, no firehouses or Home Depots. Could you do it? I couldn't. And Swinton would argue this incapacity is symptomatic of an estrangement from our local universe that has become endemic in our time and place. Game wardens are the exception, however. While out on a training run, Warden Alex Hatch stopped to show me a calf moose standing motionless among white birches up to its hocks in a stream alongside Route 1A, close to the Canadian border. "Such a teenager, gangly body, disgruntled expression," I squeaked. "He looks just like my boy, Zach." The moose, as if he'd heard, shot us a single, deeply offended glance over the hump of his shoulder before storming away downstream in a great, sloshing huff. "Where's he going?" I imagined the moose retreating to some woodland clearing beyond our earshot where he could turn up Green Day really, really loud. "Well, that creek comes off the St. John River right back there," Alex said. "It joins up with Lagasse Brook just east of Madawaska and ends up in Long Lake. So if he's so inclined, our moose could go pretty far. You know, Kate, if you could walk on water, you could step out of right here, walk down to Long Lake, cross the lake, find the entrance to Mud Creek, keep on heading south." And Alex proceeded to tick off the streams, brooks, trickles, and rivulets, that crossed and recrossed his district and beyond, all the way to Bangor. The waters of northern Maine formed a pattern as real and familiar to Alex as the lines in his palm. The St. George River flows through Thomaston and divides the peninsulas, leaving Thomaston on one side, Cushing on the other. It meets the sea in an enthusiastic tumult just past the lighthouse at Port Clyde. That is where the children, Drew's father, sister, and I, scattered Drew's ashes with our own hands. A messy business. Where, though, does the St. George begin? Which little creeks and rivulets feed it? I don't know. I also don't know at what point in its seaward journey it becomes brackish, then salt. I couldn't tell you where to dig for clams or find mussels. There are fish in the river, but I don't know what kind or how to catch them. Even if I could walk on water, would I know enough to let the St. George feed me and lead me home? It's the end of chapter 7.